We'll ask our next guest about what he saw over the weekend and what his response is to it, plus more important matters, frankly, addressing school choice in the state of Tennessee. Amongst those, we welcome back to the show Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson, who joins us in studio on this President's Day. Jack? Man, Jack is so brilliant. Bell's not in his room. I don't know what Bell's doing. But you knew to hit your button, and I'm glad you did.
Well, you know, I used to work in radio, so now we didn't have anything this fancy, though. I had like a little pot thing that you had to slide on to turn the microphone on, a little board that was about this big.
Jack, this room was fancy back in the early 2000s, I think. I think that's about right.
It's pretty fancy to me.
Oh no, we're trying to fancy it. We're fancying up the joint because of the TV side of things, which you look great on.
Well, I don't know about that.
You look fabulous on the television. Me, not so much. But there's a reason we're on radio.
Well, I'm just glad to be dressed somewhat casually, so I didn't have to put on the suit today.
And President's Day, I mean, look, we honor our for what it's worth, we honor our leaders, we honor our founding fathers. Obviously, we recognize the importance of the foundation of this country, no doubt, no question, and we honor those that have led us through the trials and travails that we've seen over the many years. But President's Day is also one of those weird days I don't really know what to do with myself. I've never really taken it off, and I don't know what I would do if I did.
Well, I spent a lot of time in banking, and of course, banks are closed on. It's one of those federally recognized holidays. But wasn't the history of it that you had George Washington's birthday and Abraham Lincoln's birthday, and they're fairly close, like right in about this time. Mm-hmm. And there was some discussion about should we have celebrate George Washington's birthday or Abraham Lincoln's or both, and they settled on President's Day. I don't know if that's true, but it seems like I
remember, and I might.
That's what I always heard.
Well, I might be screwing this memory up. But I think this is correct. This might be some sort of Mandela thing going on, but I remember having both and then them combining them at some point. I remember when I was a young kid, you had Washington's birthday one Monday, and then like 3 weeks later you had Lincoln's.
Right.
And everyone was like, well, that's too close together. Let's combine
them into one holiday.
That's what I feel like happened.
Well, me, and Bill, I think, have solved that mystery then, I guess.
Well, there you go.
If we're all three in agreement on it, it must be right.
Who is your, besides Ronald Reagan?
Oh, you can't do that.
Or Donald Trump.
Calvin Coolidge.
Oh, there you go.
Perfect answer. Perfect answer.
That is a perfect answer.
Yeah,
our interview is done. Goodbye.
One of the few.
I'm going to kick you out like that. I'm going to kick you out.
Are you kicking me out? Well, if you're going to talk to me like that, I'm just going. So I remember one of the few political science classes that I made an A in was the American presidency. And I remember studying the juxtaposition between Calvin Coolidge and then Woodrow Wilson and the stark impact. And sadly, I think Woodrow Wilson with the progressive movement had more lasting impact on our country with the progressive movement and the repeal of the 17th
Negative
Amendment.
Impact.
Negative impact, exactly. And I wish there had been a little more Calvin Coolidge in that.
So my mentor, let me tell you, I could talk all day about Calvin Coolidge because he is my favorite president. Even with Ronald Reagan in the mix. On my wall in my office in my home, my mentor, Don Markwell, had this in his office. And I, being a young 26, 27-year-old, I read it and I took to the quote so much that I kind of emulated what he had done, and I put a similar copy into my office. And it's just, it is a framed quote by Calvin Coolidge. And this is the quote: "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent."
I love that.
And it is a reminder that if you grind every day, wherever you come from, whatever background you have, if you grind every day and you're true to your belief system, you can accomplish great or even not so great things, depending on what that belief system might be.
And that's the majesty of the American experiment, is to create that environment that despite your background, where you come from, your wealth or lack thereof, education, the harder you work. And we've all known people who have demonstrated that time and time again. The older I get, the more people I get to encounter when I get to learn a little bit about them that came from very humble beginnings, dirt poor, but they just worked hard and exhibited that persistence, and now they're extremely wealthy. And so that's what we all strive for here in this American experiment.
And while I cannot leave any subject involving Calvin Coolidge without telling my favorite political story, which I know that most of you have heard 1,000 times, but I'm going to tell it anyway. He was known as Silent Cal. He did not speak very much, and he had to do these state dinners and hated them, absolutely hated doing these state dinners that he was obligated as president of the United States to do. And everybody loved them, and everybody's all giggly, and they're drinking wine, and they're doing their things. And at one particular state dinner, Calvin Coolidge was approached and seated next to a woman at the dinner who, knowing his reputation and knowing how quiet of a man he was, she leaned over to him and said, Mr. President, I have to admit that I've made a little wager with some of my friends that I can get you to say more than 3 words tonight. And Calvin Coolidge said, Madam, you lose.
I've heard that before. I love it.
So great.
I love it. Yep. 3 words or less.
I believe in the conservative concepts of keeping government out of our way, which is why I was so pleased to note that a guy who I'm told universally is a good person and a good man, a representative in the House, Representative Ron Gant. I was so pleased to note that he had pulled his cold beer legislation, or warm beer legislation, as it were. When did you find out about this?
So I guess I've heard about it on the news, on the media, and it's part of, I'll get stopped in the grocery store or the convenience store. Or in church or on the sidewalk or whatever, and somebody will come up and say, "What about Bill so-and-so, Senate Bill so-and-so?" And sometimes they'll just mention the number, and I'm sorry, I don't have all 2,000 of them memorized. I mean, tell me what's the subject matter of the bill. And so I heard about it, I think, on the news, and of course did a little bit of checking on it. But no, Representative Gant is a dear friend. He's a good guy, and you've talked about his story and his experience there, and I think you said it very well. He is a great state representative. I do not support his legislation. He's pulled it. The Senate sponsor has as well, but got it out there maybe for a conversation. And we've done a lot in Tennessee to reduce drunk driving. I'm told we have some of the stiffest penalties in the nation here in Tennessee on that, and we should. But I don't think that's the answer. Full disclosure, I've owned convenience stores. I've been in that business, and I don't now, but I didn't think it was the right way.
Well, and you know what? You can only go so far as government to protect individuals from themselves. And the best way, in my experience as a small L libertarian, is to protect me from what others might be doing. That is an appropriate role of government. Right. So if we have a community setting, and obviously our public roadways are a community setting, then you have an obligation as a government to structure rules that are going to best protect me against people that might be, flaunting the rules. And so I have no problem with drunk driving laws. I have no problem with all of those things that are going to protect the health and safety. But you can only go so far.
That's right.
Before you start encroaching on the rights of individual citizens to the point that we kind of shake our heads and go, hey, well, this is big government, not small government.
Well, and it's also a good exercise, and I think a demonstration of the process and how the process works. And the process usually does work, and we usually end up in the right place. But I've certainly done that before. I've had bills drafted and legislation filed that once I look back on it now and think, what the world was I thinking?
Well, and once again, I want to reiterate, I don't know Representative Gant. I would love to have him on the show, and we're working to have that happen, but I can't fathom going through what he's been through. And for those that did not hear the story, he had a situation where he was struck by a drunk driver crossed the middle line, and he almost died. I mean,
he came very close. It was very nip and tuck there. Thankfully, he has recovered. He's still struggling, I think, with some of the effects of his injuries, but a really, really good guy. I've carried legislation with Ron in the past, and he's a great representative. And again, I didn't support that particular bill, and it's not going to even be put on notice.
So, what do you make, before we get into more important things, because I do think that there are more important things to talk about, pieces of legislation that will dramatically impact the lives of Tennessee citizens. What do you make of what happened Saturday? So we are told there's this gathering of individuals, a couple of dozen of them. They came into town. They wanted to make a spectacle of themselves. They obviously did make a spectacle of themselves. Tell me, from your capacity as Senate Majority Leader, what your response is.
Well, it's despicable, and I think, by the way, you talked about it in your first half hour, and I thought you articulated it very well. These people they're probably not from Tennessee. I don't know where they're from. Maybe we'll find out more later. But regardless, they're not welcome here. They're not welcome here with those types of viewpoints. I condemn them and what they stand for in the strongest possible terms. And I've been so pleased to see so many people speak out against them and what they were talking about. The lieutenant governor had a post that I thought was moving when he talked about, all the tens and tens of thousands of people who fought in World War II to defeat the Nazis and protect the world from that evil, from that horror. And for people to be out there waving those flags, I think it's not Tennessean, it's not American, and I condemn it in the strongest terms.
And I don't know of any elected official, I don't know of any Tennessean that hasn't done so.
No, and thank you for saying that, because you've alluded to some of the comments that have been made by some people. I serve in the General Assembly. I know most every member, certainly know every Senate member, and I know most House members. I don't know a single person in the Senate, especially on the Republican side, who in any way espouses those viewpoints. In fact, quite the opposite. In the wake of the horrific acts in Israel by Hamas on October 7th, we have almost universally, if not universally, come out and condemned those actions and stood in strong support of the state of Israel and the Jewish people.
What Representative Jones had to say about it, set that aside for a moment. Representative Pearson said this on social media, and I understand it's the House, and I understand that he has his free speech rights as well, but he said this is the hate that the Tennessee House GOP fosters from their positions of power in the General Assembly. I'm disgusted that Nazis are comfortable doing this, but I'm not surprised. Tragically, their views are shared by many who I serve alongside on the other side of the aisle.
Well, it's reckless and it's careless. It's untrue. I can say emphatically that is untrue. I'm good friends with all 75 Republicans in the House of Representatives. I say good friends. I'm certainly acquainted with many and good friends with many, and certainly the 27 Republicans in the Tennessee State Senate who all condemn the actions of those who gathered yesterday, and we certainly stand strongly with Israel and the Jewish people.
I'm fascinated, and you've said what you've said, and I appreciate those words because I could not agree with them more. I don't know what else to do with it except to condemn, because I believe that what Representative Justin Pearson said over the weekend is not only shameful, it is dangerous. It could potentially lead to individual members of the body, those that might believe Justin Pearson, being put in danger, in harm's way. If you get someone who is mentally disturbed, who wants to take out some sort of I hesitate to even go down that road about what could happen. I just do believe that it is dangerous to use this type of language with regard to your fellow colleagues, and it's unproductive. If you're in the member, forget the fact that what you're saying is shameful and untrue.
Exactly.
You also, one would presume, if you're in the minority like the Democrats are, would want to foster certain positive relationships if you want to advance an agenda that's going to be good for your constituents. How is this fostering any sort of relationship by which you can benefit your constituency by advancing legislation that you feel like would be of benefit to them?
And sadly, I think you've hit the nail on the head. There are some members of the General Assembly from the other side of the aisle, from where I sat, who have no desire whatsoever to foster relationships, to build bipartisan agreement when it's possible, and there are many instances when it's not, but they just seek to divide.
Let's talk about matters when we come back that I believe would unify the state of Tennessee, particularly the school choice legislation, known as school choice, also known as the school scholarship plan or the Freedom Scholarship Plan. We'll talk about that with Senator Jack Johnson. It's my understanding that we might have some movement on actually seeing language within the legislation this week. We'll find out from Jack Johnson next on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. School choice, a lot of conversation about this, and not a lot of real firm ideas about where we're going. You probably know more than some, maybe even most, considering you're Senate Majority Leader. When do we expect the particulars, the details are going to come out? And explain to people, I tell you what, first off, explain to people the process, because I was trying to explain it to your colleague, Senator Heidi Campbell, and she didn't seem to understand it. So explain to people the process of sometimes how with the filing deadline in the General Assembly, you kind of file a placeholder bill knowing that that's going to be replaced by the
famous caption bill. The very, very famous caption bill is what it's referred to. No, it's really simple. And some people have tried to assign some ulterior motives. There's something sinister, shisty. We do have a bill filing deadline, and that's a good thing because there's a date certain when you cannot file any more bills. And so the way our Constitution works, if you file a piece of legislation, that the bill has to open up the particular caption of the code or the particular title, the section of the code, if you will. And so sometimes you don't have it fully baked. You don't have the actual language ready to file, but you know you will. And so you file a placeholder bill. We refer to them as a caption bill. Sometimes you file caption bills that you don't even plan to use, but you just never know what's going to happen in March or April, then you might need a bill. And that's what we did with this one. So, and it has taken us a little bit longer, and there's some reasons for that. But we expect to have language which will effectively be the governor's proposal. This is an administration bill. I, as majority leader, filed the administration bills. William Lamberth files them in the House. And so we should have an amendment ready to be referred to the respective education committees this week. And really, at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. And in fact, there was a draft that got circulated a couple of weeks ago, and we were happy to do that. We were clear that it's maybe not the final thing. The governor's going to propose 20,000 of these scholarships for the coming school year. 10,000 that will be needs-based, be for those eligible would be those at or below 300% of federal poverty level, and then another 10,000 that can be utilized by anyone, first come, first serve. That's effectively it. Now, we do want to, though, make sure that we're stating with some kind of intent, legislative intent, that we want this to grow so that we can ultimately become a state where we truly have universal school choice, which means that any kid graduating from high school, or rather that is in K-12 schools, be they public, private, would be eligible for one of these scholarships.
So some of the concerns are that this would somehow impact funding of public education. I understand that it will impact money in as much as if you have numbers of kids no longer within the public system, that will affect overall budgets. But just walk through your understanding of how this will be funded, the actual dollar amounts will be funded from the scholarship fund, and how will it impact public education funding?
Sure. So the proposed amount will be just over $7,000. I think the final number would be $7,075. Well, how'd you come up with that amount? Well, if you take the average, there are roughly almost 1 million kids that are K-12 school eligible right now. About 85% of those are in public school right now. So if you take the amount of money we appropriate for K-12 education, every kid who's in a public school right now, and you divide it by the number of kids that are in public schools, it comes to about $7,075 per student. So that's the average. Now, that does vary by district and by county, but what the governor is proposing is that we take that statewide average, that's the money the state puts into education, which, keep in mind, that's only a portion of it. There's also a local portion in every district that the local government puts in, and in some counties that's more than for others. But we're saying the statewide appropriation, on average, for every kid would follow the child, and that would generate a scholarship. Now, I would argue that for many districts, if a kid that's in public school right now and they utilize one of these education freedom scholarships and the state portion follows that child, they're keeping their local appropriation. So that money stays in the county or in the school district, yet they don't have the child to educate. So will there be...
It would be a net monetary benefit.
Exactly. For many districts, it absolutely would. Districts. So I do not view it as being fiscally damaging or detrimental to
then where's the money coming from?
In any way.
So the money's moving, but not all the money that is designated for the individual public schools is going to move with the child. So some of the money moves with the child, some doesn't. So you could kind of look at it as a net win for all parties involved because it's a voluntary movement.
It is.
On the part of the parents.
Because we're creating a scholarship here, and don't hold me to the exact dollar figure, but this is ballpark. On average, we're spending about $12,000 per child in the state of Tennessee to educate them in public schools. We're creating a $7,000 scholarship. So on average, you could say that $5,000 is going to remain in the local government, remain in the local school system, and yet the scholarship that will follow that child is far less than what's actually being spent on them right now in public schools.
Would you help Heidi understand this? Because I can't help myself. No, you don't have to respond to that. So, I mean, obviously people like Senator Heidi Campbell and others, and she made now some would consider infamous appearance on my show, asked to be on the show, asked to go after this bill that had not yet been drafted, but was very, very emphatic that it would hurt public education in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of ways to crack that open, but I don't believe that it hurts the funding. Every funding mechanism that I've seen indicates that it'll leave more money behind than it keeps it. And I want to make sure that people understand this because it took me a minute to understand this. There is already, correct me if I'm wrong, freedom of movement within the public education system in the state of Tennessee, right?
Yes, to a degree, and there are some conditions on that.
I mean, you have to pay.
Exactly,
So, if I want to move from a lower tax county to a higher taxed county with regard to public education, I might have to bridge that gap of money.
Right.
So if I move from a county to Williamson County, for example, Williamson County taxes a little more for public education, so I might have to pay the difference.
Right.
But other than that, I am free to move if there is availability and if I see a desire to do so because of a better educational opportunity.
That's right.
So this opens up you're opening up freedom of movement without financial barriers or barricades throughout the state of Tennessee so that people can look to even more opportunities. I look at it as an education toolbox and giving parents maximum tools in that toolbox for the education of their child.
And let me put an exclamation point behind that, because you're spot on. There are a million public school or K-12 age kids in the state of Tennessee. The governor's proposing, and full disclosure, he wants to expand it. We would like to expand it. But for this year, 20,000. 20,000 out of a million is 2%. 2%.
Right.
You have more fluctuation than that just because of people moving in and out. So it is not. And the one thing about Senator Campbell that I take great issue is that she referred to this as some kind of a scam, I believe is the word that she used.
I want to address that in a second because there's the talk of scam and there's a talk of literally destroying public education as a result of that 2%. More on that in a moment, but I forget about the fact that Mac Morey's back there waiting to do the news. It's 1:34. I am way late. Bell looks disgusted at me, and rightly so. Here's Mac Morey in the newscast on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Super Talk 99.7 WTN, Matt Murphy and you. Also, Senator Jack Johnson's in studio with us for a few more minutes, talking the General Assembly, the legislative session that has been and that is upcoming, and some of the action expected this week and beyond. I asked just before we came back from break, I'll just peel the curtain back and let you guys in because you guys think that like Jack and I are having some sort of super secret conversations here. Here's the conversation. Hey, I need to ask you if you're running for the 7th Congressional District. Jack laughed like he just did and said, yes, I'm happy to clean any of that up if you'd like. Jack, with the announcement that Congressman Mark Green has made the decision, I think you're in 7, aren't you?
I am, yes. I live in the 7th Congressional District.
And what are your current plans with regard to public service? I love the way you put that.
Love the way you put that. Well, let me first say, Mark Green is a great friend. We served together in the state Senate for about 6 years. I believe we overlapped, and he did a great job. I'm sorry to see him leave as our congressman. I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in going to Washington. The answer is, if I'm asked, am I interested in running for that? The short answer is no. The long answer is heck no. I'm grateful for people that are willing to go to Washington.
For gosh sake, watch your language.
You're funny.
But I have no interest in that. We are getting so much done at the state level here, and I very much believe that when you think about federalism, you think about state rights, state sovereignty, and standing up to the federal government, that the real battle lines are being drawn at the state level, and it's important that we continue the good work we're doing here. Tennessee is the most conservative state in the United States of America. We are leading the nation in so many different ways, and I want to make sure we keep doing that, because ultimately, for this republic to survive, states are going to have to stand up and reassert their state sovereignty.
Almost a Sherman-esque quote there. Almost a Sherman-esque quote. It's one of my favorite quotes about Bala is, what is it? I think I've got this right. If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve.
That's right.
Which was Sherman's quote about whether or not he was interested in the presidency of the United States. Any ideas about where this goes then? I mean, maybe it's way too soon. We've got to figure out where people's hearts are, where their minds are. Frankly, after the 5th congressional district debates and all of that going on, I'm not really sure with the restructuring and the new lines where 7 ends and 5 begins or 6 ends. And so I'm not sure who's who and who would even qualify, but any early leaders in the clubhouse for Jack Johnson?
Well, I'm going to refrain from mentioning any names. Like you and like probably many people listening, I've heard some names that have been mentioned, some of whom I thought would be outstanding candidates for Congress. But the good news is the filing deadline is April 4th, so we'll know
pretty quick.
We'll know pretty quick. The field will materialize and crystallize here pretty quick. It is incredibly important that we elect the right person and someone who will go up. And again, selfishly, I'm looking for someone who's going to go up and realize that the federal government has gotten way out of control and has far exceeded the limitations that I believe were intended by the framers. And we've got to get back to states asserting themselves. And we need a good partner with that. And we've got some great people in our delegation right now. So we'll find a good person.
Speaking about Mark Green and his service, and sadly I missed most of that before coming to the great state of Tennessee, but I got to catch his service as a congressman, and it's obvious and it's well on record as to how he has served the state of Tennessee. But it's something that he said in his announcement leads me to believe that it's not over. And I'm not asking you for any intimate knowledge because I know he's a friend, but he said, I've come to realize, I'm paraphrasing him, that the solution is not in Washington, or the how to tackle these issues are not in Washington. Our issues are with Washington, indicating to me that he feels like, and once again, don't want to put thoughts in his head, but I'll ask you, do we need to see more governors, like our own Governor Bill Lee has made some pretty emphatic statements about the overreach of the federal government, more governors like Greg Abbott? Do we need to see more collections of states pushing back on this overbearing federal government that thinks that they can dictate every aspect, every intimate detail of our daily lives in the state of Tennessee?
I've seen it firsthand because I've served, I've been in the state Senate under, George W. Bush and also Donald Trump. And I can tell you that certainly during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president of the United States, we saw the federal government pulling back. We saw a reduction in terms of the amount of interference that we have to deal with. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that should President Trump win another term this November, that will be one of the priorities during that 4 years that he has remaining to serve, to continue to allow states to assert their state sovereignty. And to your question, I think if you see more of that, it's why I've always supported Convention of the States, and ultimately there might need to be a constitutional convention called. That's a very high bar to try to meet, but it's something that should be on the table. But if we could get the right people in Washington and get in control in Washington, we could undo a lot of the damage.
Toward that end, there are some in Tennessee, some actors on, and these are, publications, whether they be websites or bloggers or whatnot. And there are some that would call my shot, and I think some that are serving with you in the Senate. I think Janice Bowling filed I don't know what we would call it, a nullification bill, or just a reassertion of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, and a reassertion that the states have the lane when the federal government does not specifically speak on some of these matters. There's some that are suggesting that the General Assembly's not done enough when it comes to things like immigration policy to protect Tennessee, considering that it's clear the federal government's not going to protect the United States of America and our southern borders. Do you believe that there's been enough done by the General Assembly, and is there any more that you can do specific to the issue of immigration?
Well, from a high level, what states have to do is demagnetize themselves. You have to remove the reasons that. Now, we can do things like Governor Lee has done. We've sent National Guard troops down to the border to help. We've deployed resources down there, and so that's certainly helpful. Other states have done that as well to try to help Texas and secure their border. Ultimately, the federal government has the responsibility, which they're failing miserably at right now in terms of securing that border. We also know under Donald Trump that he curbed illegal illegal immigration flow into the United States down to a trickle. Many presidents prior to Donald Trump had said, well, I'm going to secure the border. They never did. Well, Donald Trump did it. And had he been elected to another term, and hopefully he will be this November, I think he would have actually shut down the southern border. So we are always looking at ways we can demagnetize Tennessee and remove the reasons. Once those people are in the United States of America, you do have freedom of movement. You have the ability to traverse and move from state to state and community to community. And so we have to remove the reasons that those people want to come to Tennessee. You do that with E-Verify. You do that with the SAVE Act, which I sponsored a few years ago, which says that in order to receive public benefits, public entitlements in the state of Tennessee, you have to prove your citizenship or that you're in the country legally.
Did that pass?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
it's on the books right now. We're one of the few states. So for those people who would say we haven't done enough, make sure you know what we have done and that we've utilized virtually every lever we can find to make sure that we are demagnetizing Tennessee and letting those people, once they're in the country, unfortunately they're in the country, go to other states that don't have those same kind of policies on the books.
Is it a situation, considering the uncertainty of what comes in November? I think all of us long for a Donald Trump presidency that will get serious about the southern border, which will alleviate some of the pressure that we're seeing right now in all states, not just Tennessee. But is there any more, and are you open to looking to more that we can do with the unfortunate possibility that you see another Biden term or Harris or whoever it might be on the Democrat side of things? They don't seem to be experiencing, well, I don't know. It remains to be seen how much backlash they're going to get over what they're doing. I think the American people are smarter than this. I think they're smarter than the talking points, and I think they're going to speak loudly in November. In the unlikely event that doesn't happen, anything more you'd like to see happen? You mentioned E-Verify. I know that there are loopholes and there are ways around getting this done in a fashion that would really prevent some of the business opportunities, work opportunity. What more can be done, I guess, is the question.
You think about the reasons. If you have a porous southern border, which regrettably we do right now, and hopefully that'll be remedied with a second term of Donald J. Trump as president. But in your hypothetical example, should that not happen and we continue to have a porous border, then you have to think about what are the reasons these people are coming to the United States. And generally it is for jobs, or benefits, some type of entitlement type programs. And so we have to make sure that when they come across, that when they're thinking about, okay, now I've made it into the United States, which state am I going to go to? Which community am I going to go to? You want to make Tennessee the least desirable place for those people who are in this country illegally to want to travel. And we've done a lot of that, but I'm certainly open to better ideas. And there are bills filed virtually every year to try to think of different ways we can help send that signal. And to employers in the state of Tennessee, don't employ these people. You better be following the law with the I-9 process, E-Verify, to make sure the people you are hiring are in the country legally. And if they're not, then you're going to be held accountable.
Does the Republican Party get a bad rap, not specific necessarily to your colleagues in the General Assembly, who are now in control, both bodies? Does the Republican Party get a bad rap of allowing some of this to go on? We call them Chamber of Commerce Republicans, where they're concerned about business models that have come to depend on illegal labor. Is there a legitimate complaint there from folks listening that would suggest that there are some that like the status quo because it assists them with regard to their specific business?
In my time in the General Assembly, I've never been lobbied one time by anyone from the business community saying we need more illegal immigrants in the state of Tennessee. Not a single time. No one has ever advocated that. I think maybe they just know that's not going to go anywhere with me, and that argument would probably get you very quickly removed from my office if you're going to try to advocate that Tennessee be a place for people who are in the country illegally to want to come. So no, that's never been an issue. What you do hear from the business community is unnecessary overregulation and creating things and processes that businesses have to follow that are ineffective and just create more more work and cost businesses more money. And we don't want to do that, but I have no issue putting processes in place. One of the very first bills I passed, Matt, in 2007 was for universal use of E-Verify by every employer in the state of Tennessee. Is my very first year in the state Senate. Unfortunately, and I passed it. I passed it in the Senate. Unfortunately, Democrats killed it in the House. We came back a couple of years later. Jim Tracy, my good friend, actually sponsored it, and we were one of the first states to pass the utilization of E-Verify in the state of Tennessee. And that's a tool. That's one thing. That's not going to solve the problem. Again, it goes to benefits and entitlements. That's why I sponsored the legislation to say, if you're going to receive these entitlement benefits in Tennessee, you first got to show that you're in the country legally.
Jack, thank you for the better part of an hour. Thank you for your service. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Get back to work tomorrow, will you?
I am. Bright and early. I'll be up there. Thanks, Matt.
Take care. There's Senator Jack Johnson for the better part of our hour.